Good evening all and welcome. With spooky season well in its midst, it's time to go to some haunted houses for a collection of scary stories. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. The following is a true story that happened in the early 1990s when I was about 14 and lived with my parents. When I was about 13, my dad worked for a government contractor and his work moved us from our hometown to another location that was about 200 miles away. To me, it seemed like out in the middle of nowhere. We moved over on my 9th grade year, but my dad moved first to find a place for us to live while our old house sold. We ended up staying in a rental for a short period of time to give my parents enough time to find the right house. After a few months went by, my parents finally found a house. From where we lived before, my hometown was a suburb and super expensive at the time. But where we moved to, the land and homes were a lot cheaper, so my parents took advantage of that and bought a huge home. We went from a single-story 3-bedroom 1-bath house to a 5-bedroom 3-bath 2-story house. I didn't get to see the house before my parents put the offer, as they went home shopping while I was at my new school. I remember when they drove by for the first time to show us the new house, and it looked like a mansion compared to our old house. Although I missed all my friends and my old neighborhood, this house from the outside looked so cool. It was in the oldest part of the city, as there was a lot of new constructions going up all around, but my parents apparently got a really great deal on the home. Once we went inside, I knew why. It was the evening when my parents got the keys to the new house, so by the time we met the realtor and drove over to the new house, it was dark outside, which made for the more creepy setting. When we walked in, it was like a time capsule. Everything looked like it had been frozen in the 1960s. It also had a funny old smell, like the place had been vacant for years. Much later, I found out that in fact the place had been sitting vacant for nearly 8 years, until we purchased it. Even before that, it was odd that the previous owners or tenants never updated a thing in the house. For example, there was shag carpet everywhere. In some rooms, it was avocado green, and in others, like burnt orange. All the appliances were from the 60s, and the paint in the rooms were all strange colors. It looked like it was a crash pad for hippies. My dad was very handy, so immediately they got working on renovating the house, having extended members of our family in different fields, like flooring, painting, and carpentry. My dad called in a lot of family to help. Eventually, the house completely renovated and we moved in. Now, I always felt uneasy in certain parts of the house. I couldn't ever explain it, but things like shadows, lights turning off and on, even my sister's hairdryer turning on at 2 a.m. one time. The thing that happened the most were footsteps. I would hear footsteps coming up the stairs at night when everything was quiet. Fast forward a year after we move in, I was the first to notice something odd in the house. This started when I asked my parents to move to an upstairs room because it was bigger and had a nice walk-in closet, so they agreed. I started thinking about how the house was laid out upstairs. You could see there was a great open room that was the majority of the upstairs, and we used it as a family room. At the end was a hallway that went to 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom, but the layout didn't make sense, as there was a void behind the other bedroom that was adjacent to mine and the bathroom. There was almost enough room for another bedroom, but that space went out over our garage. So one day I drew our house like a diagram and couldn't figure out why there was such a big void. I asked my dad and he shrugged it off. So one day I went outside to that side of the house and noticed something odd. There was once a window there. It was covered up by some big vent-looking thing with a sloppy patch of stucco. At this point I was super curious and studied the layout again, and noticed that the wall on the other side of the bathroom had a patch of drywall in the shape of a doorway. It was right there. There was another room. Why did someone close it off? Obviously my dad would have killed me if I broke open the drywall, so I had an idea and I wasn't sure if it would work. But one day when my parents were visiting my aunt and uncles, I opted to stay home alone. I knew they'd be gone for hours because of the distance. I figured out that if I went up into the attic crawl space above the garage and broke through the drywall there, my dad might not notice that. I did that, as I doubt he ever went up there. I grabbed some tools and began cutting through the drywall and eventually made a big enough opening to crawl between the studs. I was right. I entered another room of our house. I was half excited, half terrified. I was excited that I was right, but after looking around the room, it was obvious that it was a bedroom at one time. The walls were an old pink color, and the carpet had been pulled up so there was no carpet or padding, just the strips that the tracks of carpet went around the walls. I could see why they closed off the doorway. There were no doors to the closet in that room either. It looked like at one time posters were on the walls, but had been ripped off, and the only other thing I found in there was cigarette butts and old beer cans with the pull tab type that had been in the early 70s and 80s. I saw from the outside the window was removed and some metal vent was nailed in place to cover the opening. I only had a cheap flashlight with me, and even though it was during the day, the room seemed very dark inside. I started feeling really creeped out being inside it, and the smell was very old and musty. I got out of there and tried to make an excuse for going up the crawl space, so I started moving boxes of junk up there so I could tell my parents I was cleaning the garage and found it. When my parents got home, I made up a story that I was putting boxes and noticed a hole, and made the hole bigger to see what I found in the room. They didn't get mad, but almost disappointed that I stumbled on a secret. They eventually came clean that the realtor told them about the room, so I was like, hey, let's open it and make this a 6-bedroom house. My dad said no and to just leave it alone. Eventually time passed, and on occasion I would take friends up there to see the mystery room. After the opening, things in the house got even creepier. Like the footsteps going upstairs and walking upstairs would be louder. There were shadows that you would see in the dark, and one time a family friend screamed because she saw a woman in the mirror and she was walking up the stairs and thought it was my mum, but when she turned it went away. Another time a friend was sleeping over in the other room, and he ran outside in the middle of the night so scared that he went out of the house in his boxers and said something kept whispering in his ear. When I was 16, I happened to talk to an older neighbor, and he mentioned that he was one of the original owners in that neighborhood, and I asked him about my house, and he mentioned something that the son used to live there and went back to prison in the early 70s. He wouldn't go into details, but just said it was really sad and don't let drugs ruin your life. I looked up old newspapers and stuff in the library and only found an article about a teen who killed a family member and attempted to kill his parents before he was arrested. My family moved out shortly after I turned 17, and I never went back to that house again. When I was a baby, my parents said that I would always see things they couldn't, and would often laugh or even talk to nothing. So I've always been superstitious, but didn't necessarily believe in ghosts. When I was 9, we moved into a beautifully maintained 1950s home with original bathrooms and other original features. The previous owner who built the house also died in there, presumably of old age. My room was the original primary suite, and always uncomfortably colder than the rest of the house, even in the Texas summer heat. Like if I set the thermostat to 76, it really felt like 68. My parents chalked it up to the house being old, and my room being the most shaded by a giant oak tree in the backyard. Within weeks of moving in, I began to hear human footsteps on the roof, but only ever over my room. There was no attic above my room, so it couldn't have been squatters. My parents tried to say that perhaps it was just animals, but the gait and weight of the steps felt undeniably human. Whenever I tried to record these footsteps, the recordings would never capture the sound. It started freaking my parents out a bit, so they had a contractor come and look at the roof over my room and found nothing. Next, I started hearing footsteps in the hallway by my door. I was a very light sleeper and would wake up in the middle of the night to footsteps right next to my bed, only to find nothing and no one there. I would wake up to the sound of the closet doors opening and closing, but find them all closed. Our alarm system had motion detectors in the hallway and in my room, but they'd never pick up on any movement when I'd hear the footsteps. Then I began seeing a man's face whenever I would turn out the light on my nightstand. It was like an image when it's burned into your brain and looking at a light for too long, but it was a clear image of a face. When I was 10, and this had been happening for around a year, I started looking up more about ghosts and read that they can become attached to sentimental things. Because the bathroom attached to my room was original, except for flowers that my mum had painted for me, it had this razor deposit in the wall for men to dispose of their razors after shaving. All I could think about were all the razors that sit in the wall. I thought perhaps it could be something a ghost would attach itself to. So I wrote down a note promising that I'd take care of the house and there was nothing for it to worry about. I put the note in the razor hole and didn't hear any more footsteps or doors or see any more faces for 12 years. After I graduated from college, my parents sold the house. The last night I visited and stayed there before they moved, I heard the footsteps again on the roof. I feel bad for whoever it is. I always felt a hint of sadness in that room and grew very empathetic to the ghost, even with all the weird stuff going on when I was a kid. They were very clearly attached to their home, and the new owners completely remodeled it. I lived in this house for about 7 years. It's in a small town in central Texas. The house is 1 story, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, with a front and back living room and a nice-sized backyard with a palm tree, gazebo, and a shed converted into a bar. It was right across the street from a Catholic church and cemetery. After we moved out, we found out the property used to be an orphanage in the 1960s that shut down, and before that, it was a funeral home with a crematorium that the orphanage was using to dispose of bodies of the malnourished and abused children living there. We, as in me and my immediate family, were initially hired to clean up the house after the previous tenants had trashed it. By trashed, I mean nearly wrecked. The carpets when we cleaned it were a light beige colour, but they started out black. There were human-sized holes in the walls, as if someone was slammed repeatedly all through the house. Dead chickens and other small animals were all over the floor, along with black candles, pentagrams on the walls and floor, and some mystery blood smeared on the back closet of the master bedroom. How we'd feel comfortable enough moving in after everything we found? Well, that's anyone's guess. When we cleaned it all up, it was a really nice place, and the rent was only $450 a month. We should have seen the signs and the red flags based off the low rent alone, but I digress. The first incident happened on the first day in that house. I had most of my stuff in already, so my parents told me to wait at the new house while they went to our old one with my siblings to gather more things. I decided to take a nap after putting a few things on the dresser. In the center of the dresser, I put a Mary candle that my mum had given me. Might be important to note that most of the satanic stuff was found in the master bedroom that had a walk-in closet, dressing room, and its own bathroom. This room became my room because everyone else was too scared to even set foot in it, including my parents. The whole 7 years we lived there, the only time anyone else but me set foot in the room was before we moved in while we were cleaning the house. My little brother got the middle room, and my younger sister got the room next to his at the end of the hall, next to the other bathroom, and my parents turned the back living room into their bedroom. After arranging my stuff on the dresser, I laid on the bed to take a nap while waiting for my family to return with more things. Not 2 minutes after I shut my eyes, the candle slid off the right side of the dresser to the floor with a thud. I was a little freaked out, But as it was by myself, I tried to rationalize it, saying it was the wind, or perhaps my dresser was crooked or slanted. I checked the dresser by pulling it away from the wall a smidge, and putting a ball in the center to see if it rolled. It didn't. When I checked all the doors and windows to make sure there wasn't a draft or something, I put the candle back in the center and laid back down. Not a minute or so after I shut my eyes, the candle slid off the left side this time, like someone was sliding it, and fell. I said nope, and ran outside and waited on the porch until my family arrived. When they questioned why I was outside, because it was summer, and Texas is hellishly hot in the summer, I replied I wanted some fresh air and sun, trying to play it off so they wouldn't think I was crazy. This next incident happened after we'd been living there a few months. I was asleep in my room with the door open because it made me feel better, and the rest of my immediate family were gathered in my sister's room down the hall, telling each other ghost stories as it was close to Halloween. My mum said something along the lines of, "You'll better stop telling each other stuff before something happens." Right after she said that, my door slammed shut and I started screaming. Side note, when I was younger, I used to sleep talk and sleepwalk a lot, especially if there were paranormal activity in the house, as this wasn't the last time we lived in a haunted house, unfortunately. My mum urged my stepdad to go check in on me, but he just said, "You go check in on her." So eventually they both came in, and they said once they opened the door, they saw me sitting up in bed with my eyes open but glassy and not focused on anything. I kept saying, "Get off me. Help." They were too scared to enter the room. So, from the door, they switched on the lights and said, "Get out." At that moment, they claim a black cloud lifted off me and I fell back in bed with my eyes closed, fast asleep. And they frickin' left me there because they were too afraid and told me about it in the morning. I knew they weren't lying, because the dream I had the night before matched up with what they were saying, and they both looked kind of pale when they were telling me. The next part of this story relates to a family friend called Donnie Ray. For some background on him, he was a family friend as long as I can remember, but some would say he was a bit of an odd character. He distrusted cars with a passion, so he rode his bike everywhere, even if it was 30 miles away. He lived in an abandoned house and used a toilet seat over a bucket, since there was no actual toilet, and he set up his own irrigation system near a stream to the house so that he could have water. He was a kind soul, and we loved when he came to visit us. We mostly went to visit him, but sometimes he'd bike the 25 miles himself as a surprise visit. On this particular day, he came in the morning, and by midday, me, my mother, and Donnie Ray were chilling on the front porch while we were drinking mixed drinks, and I had my sweet tea. My mum finished her drink and asked Donnie Ray if he wanted another, as she was about to go inside to make herself another. He said sure, why not, and she went inside. Not 30 seconds later, my mum came from this side of the house with different clothes on and walked up to us. What's weird about this is to come from this side of the house, she would have had to have gone all the way to the back door and come all the way around. We said, "What are you doing? I thought you were making drinks." She said, "Don't worry about that. Can we just talk?" and proceeded to talk about death and suffering in a kind of laughing manner as if she found it enjoyable. We didn't say anything while she talked because we were still wondering how she changed her clothes so fast. Suddenly, in the middle of her talking, she said, "I gotta go," and sprinted around the side of the house. Not 30 seconds after that, my mum came back through the front door with 2 drinks in her hand and her original clothes on. We both stared at her, and she asked, "What's going on?" We told her that she had come around the house with different clothes on, talking crazy. She didn't believe us and thought we were playing a practical joke of some kind. We dropped the subject and went back to chilling. After a bit, I wanted to ride my bike, My mum was pretty strict growing up, so the only place I could ride my bike was the church/cemetery parking lot across the street. I begged Donnie Ray to come with me, since none of my school friends were allowed to come over, so I wanted the company, and he was there. My mum told me no, of course, but he said it was alright, and we set off to ride the bikes around the parking lot, because that was as far as I could go. After a while he said, "Hey baby, I want to show you a little something." I said okay, let's go to the grotto first, and we biked down to the grotto behind the church. We sat on the bench there, and he asked me what the grotto was for, and I told him you could pray, I think. We sat in silence for a few minutes till he said to follow him. He led me down the cemetery part, and we stopped in front of a grave. "That's my brother right there. He died when he was a young man." I said sorry to Donnie Ray. What was he like? He told me and began to cry, and said the angels have been talking to him, and that he's waiting for him. I asked him, "What do you mean?" He said he was going to die soon. The angels have been telling him for a while now, apparently. "Are you sick?" "No, I'm not," he said. "I don't know how it's going to happen. I just know it's coming for me." We hugged and stood there in silence for a little bit. Then wordlessly we came back to the house. He spent a few more hours and then biked home. A few months after that strange day, we were about to go to sleep when my stepdad got a call. It was Donnie Ray's mother, telling us that he'd got hit by a truck driver while on his bike. They couldn't even find all his body parts, that's how badly he got hit. Everyone started crying and freaking out. Suddenly a trash can in the kitchen, where we were all at, began shaking, and we froze. My stepdad screamed, "Leave now, you're not welcome here," and it stopped. After a few minutes of us standing around miserably, we shuffled off to bed. I thought back on what Donnie Ray had told me, and I cried into my pillow all night. These stories took place when I was young, at either my house or my grandparents' house. We only live 5 minutes away from each other in any case. My house was built on an ancient vine culture, and my grandparents' house was purchased from a previous owner, and they have no history about what was on there before. My first experiences began pretty late. Before that, I had never had any disturbing experiences except nocturnal terrors and nightmares, but nothing abnormal. Even though I grew up in a Catholic family, I had never been taught that spirits existed. To me, ghosts were just the ones you saw in cartoons, with the white drape and the 2 holes for eyes. I did not know that human souls had the possibility to stay on Earth. My mother always said, good souls went to heaven, and bad souls plummeted to hell. And I never questioned it. I wasn't even interested in it. I was a kid, and had other interests than death. My mum never really believed in the paranormal anyway, and my dad was even more skeptical. It all started when I was 9. In my house, there were 4 rooms. 3 were on the first floor, and there was a guest room on the second floor which was basically used like an attic. The 3 downstairs bedrooms were my brother's, mine, and my parents' respectively. When my mum discovered she was pregnant again, and since I was the eldest, I had to move upstairs. It was a very big room with a personal toilet and bathroom, and to be honest, I like it a lot. But back then it wasn't the case at all. The first 2 years I couldn't sleep in the room. I always felt like there was something heavy in the atmosphere, like I was being watched. I was very cold when I would be there in the middle of summer, and the summers where I lived were very hot. Up until I was 11, I was spending my whole time downstairs in the living room or in my little sister's room, which had been my bedroom before. Then I found the courage to move back to my bedroom, but things got worse. At first, it was just noises. Every evening, as soon as my father turned off the TV to go to bed, I heard noises in the living room. The light switch went on or off. It's a specific light switch. I don't know what's the matter with this one, but it does a lot of noise when it's being used. The gamer chair of my father was wheeling, and it sounded as if someone was running barefoot on the ground, and children were running everywhere. There were other strange noises too, as if someone was using a broom and sweeping up. One evening I heard someone climbing the stairs very quickly. At first it was clear and distinct and I thought it was my brother, so I went out of the bedroom but no one was there. Then I felt as if someone was touching me while I was in bed. I felt a heavy weight on the bed, sometimes even someone's breath. Safe to say, I was terrified. I remember crying in fear when I felt hot breath on my face. A lot of items started to disappear too. Some of my clothes, some of my sister's shirts, a karaoke mic that Mum had tied to the dressing room, an entire file with papers out of our car that my mum had left in plain sight because the car was to be sold. Some shoelaces, the list goes on. My mum, who is not a real believer of these things, still confessed having experienced weird things herself. Odd noises, doors opening on their own. Once, she swore she saw my brother running outside in our garden. She opened the window to tell him it was lunchtime, and my brother said, "Yes, I'm coming." But the voice wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from his bedroom. When she looked outside again, there was no one there. We both heard strange noises coming from the rooftop as well, as if there were people running on it, heavy footsteps running around everywhere. Now she also hears noises coming from my bed at 4 a.m. when I'm sleeping. She claims she hears loud footsteps, as if you were tidying up your bedroom. Maybe I'm sleepwalking, but I don't move furniture or move things while I'm asleep. I would see that things were not at the same spot where I left them the next morning. Now, the first large event happened at my house when I was 14. It was during the Easter holidays. My brother and sister were gone for the week. I was the only one with my mum and dad. It was a sunny afternoon and my dad was working on the other side of the garden, while I was reading on the opposite side with my mum. When it was 4 p.m, I decided to go prepare myself a peanut butter sandwich, so I opened the window of the living room and walked through it. If you continued straight forward, there's a window that opens to the other side of the garden where my father was working. On the left was a door that was always open and that leads to the kitchen, so I turned left in the kitchen, and when I was almost done, I heard the window leading to the garden opening. Then I saw my mum going out, probably to talk with my dad. I didn't even pay attention. I closed the peanut butter pot and go back to my seat. It takes around 15 seconds if you walk very slowly to come back to the window where the seats are. And what do I see in the chair next to mine when I arrive? My mum reading her book. How can she be there when she was on the other side of the garden about 10 seconds ago? The only way would have been to go by the living room again, but obviously if she had to turn back, she would have been behind me, so there's no other way it could have been done. My mum had an accident a few years ago where the ligaments of her ankle got very damaged. She couldn't walk very fast at the time and still can't. When I asked her what she was doing there, she said, "What do you mean? I didn't go anywhere." And she had no reason to lie. She couldn't have moved here that fast. We did a test. It was impossible. It's also important to note that a friend of my dad's went to sleep in my bedroom when it was still a guest room, and the guy confessed to my mum that he couldn't sleep in it. It felt really bad in the room, as if someone was watching him while he was asleep. And he's definitely not the type to believe in spirits. He's a skeptical man and an engineer. I also have a dog, and it's very calm and a sweet little puppy. Never barks and feels comfortable everywhere in the house. One day I wanted to take him upstairs to keep an eye on him, since my mum wasn't home. But as soon as he entered the room I could feel he was not at ease. He kept looking around him as if he was afraid. He barked, but it wasn't an aggressive bark. It was a bark of fear. He went to my door and began scratching as if he wanted to get out. He never did anything like this. He was squealing with fear and seemed very frightened. I let him out the room. The second thing happened at my grandparents' house. There was a spare bedroom in their house that used to be my mum's bedroom. I could never stay in here. Sometimes when we were playing hide and seek, I'd hide behind an old table in that room, and each time I would feel sick, felt nauseous and cold air, even in the summer. And again, summers are hot where I live. The average temperature would be around 35 Celsius. There was this one time that I was with my friend, and we went to help clean the room because my grandma couldn't do it and she was sick, and my friend needed the money. So, it was interesting for her and my grandma too. I could tell my friend felt uneasy. She complained from a headache a few seconds after I started feeling nauseous, and each time I was feeling something, she would have violent headaches. During the cleaning session, the sponge vanished and magically reappeared in plain sight on a chair 5 minutes later. But anyway, 2 years ago, I stayed at my grandparents' house for the Christmas holidays. Problem: some of the radiators were broken, and the one in the bedroom where I usually slept is one of them, so I had to sleep in my mum's former bedroom. I was 17 at the time and was like, "You got this, you're not a kid anymore. It's just for 1 week." At 10 p.m. I went to the bedroom to read and chat with some friends. The ambience was really good, even though the bedroom was really cold. I finally shut down the lights to sleep, but God, that was the most terrifying moments of my life. Scratching inside the wall, strange noises, a weight on my bed. At some moments I even felt as if something wanted to lie beside me. I felt as if someone had moved the cover I was sleeping with. Then finally, after being tormented for hours, I fell asleep from exhaustion. I had the strangest dream that I was in a room that looked like a little public swimming pool, but with just one pool. There was a balcony with green plants and a little candle, and there was an old lady lying on the ground on a white mat, very pale with long white hair and a nightdress, with big blue eyes. She wasn't scary, and the overall ambience was very sweet, but still felt very strange. The woman told me to come closer with a very sweet voice and took me in her arms. She cried, telling me that she was happy to see me, but she had a cancer and that she was going to die very soon. I woke up to those words and was crying, but the bedroom was warm like in the dream. I felt extremely sad, and even now when I think about this event I feel sadness. I don't know who this woman is, and I never met her, and still have no idea. That's the long list of strange experiences that have happened to me in both houses. If anyone has any insight into what it could have been, I'd love to find out. In December of 2021, my girlfriend and our son moved into an apartment in Aberdeen. In no way is she an unbeliever of the paranormal, but she does get spooked at the idea of sharing a roof with a spirit. In the year of living in this apartment, she hadn't heard any knocking, movement, or seen any shadowy figures. Sometime after I started visiting her, we quickly found signs that we weren't alone. She would hear knocks, or what sounded like something wandering around in her home. Around the third or fourth time of me coming over, we hopped into the shower after a long day of adventuring. After rinsing off and stepping out to dry, I look up into our son's room, and peering out at me was a tall, shadow figure with long arms and glowing red eyes. Within the blink of an eye, it vanished. Panic set in. I leaned into the shower and told my girlfriend what happened. Shocked and stunned, she said, "Shut up, no way, you're joking, right?" After drying off and getting dressed, I inspected our son's bedroom but couldn't find any signs of the apparition. After both of us calmed down and went to bed, we woke up the next morning to talk about what we had encountered. Fast forward a few more weeks, we started moving our son to his own little bed and plugged in our baby monitor, then climbed into the bed and cuddled up in pure darkness. As we were slowly drifting to sleep, we could hear our son start to cry. We were laying there letting him cry out a bit, then suddenly hitting us like a truck, and a deep demonic-like voice came through the baby monitor. "Wake up." Chills went up our spines, and we raced into his room and scooped him up and ran back into our bed. We finally moved her out of the apartment and closer to town. I'd like to preface this by saying that I believe in spirits and ghosts. I've had many encounters in my life, and I have tales from my family too, that I retell quite often. Honestly, telling scary stories has become one of my favorite things since I was in 3rd grade. All that aside, my first time living away from my parents began in August 2020, in a cookie-cutter neighborhood that was relatively new and in a very nice area. I lived there with 3 other friends at the time in this 4-bedroom home, and between myself, my best friend and roommate, we had 2 cats, Stark and Hoshi. Hoshi is my cat. He's a funky little man, but he's a good boy nonetheless. But that doesn't omit him from any heinous deeds. In this first house, Hoshi and I got the master bedroom, which included a master bathroom and a walk-in closet. For the entire year I lived there, I never let the closet go without the lights on. I set up LEDs and would hang out in there from time to time when I was overwhelmed, and even slept in there a few times because it was just a comfortable space. But I did not like the closet to be dark. I can't explain why. There just needs to be lights there at all points. If there weren't any lights, I couldn't stand to even look there. Now, another part of the bathroom was a huge-ass bathtub that I absolutely adored. I grew up relatively poor, so I hadn't been able to take a comfortable bath in a long time, so I was very excited for this. I don't positively enjoy bathtubs, but I love to boil my skin like a lobster, so when I had a particularly bad day, it was nice to just sit and roast in the warm water. One thing in particular that I like to do on those bad days is lay back and put my head underwater, just enough for my ears to be covered so the world can be muffled for a while. Then I stayed like that for however long my brain needed to feel at peace, and then sit up and I'm good to go. I took baths pretty often at this house. It was a nice privilege compared to what I grew up with, and one day I was bathing and I dipped my head underwater. I stayed still for some time. Then I heard a quick few knocks that were muffled from the water, so I sat up. Thinking it was one of my 3 roommates, I called for them to enter my room, but that I was bathing, so not to come into the bathroom. When I received no response, I shrugged it off as perhaps one of the cats, and underwater I went again. Moments later the knocks happened again and I repeated the process. The 3rd time the knocks happened, I got annoyed and texted my roommates asking who keeps messing with my door. The response was that no one was trying to get at my door. Again I assumed our cats were being brats and finished my bath. From that point, any time I dunked my head underwater, I'd hear these knocks. Honestly, I'm ashamed to admit it took me a bit of time to realize, but I finally figured out that the knocks were coming from the side of the bathtub and not my bedroom. The only reason I picked up on it was because the difference in sound of the light wood of the door and the hard plastic of the bathtub. I have no idea what was knocking, and this isn't to try and say anything, but I think whatever was knocking on the side of my bathtub thought that I was going to drown, but who knows. I don't take baths at the new house. We affectionately call it the murder house, so I can't continue to test the knocking. What I will say is that I have a vague idea of what was doing it. In the house we would often see this small shadow, by we I mean 3 out of the 4 of us, that would actively leave our rooms. We would see it run down our hall, or peek around the corners, or even poke its head in our rooms. God, that sounds crazy. Anyway, whatever that shadow was, like idiots, we gave it a name. And I know that you're thinking it was a bad idea. Trust me, I understand. But the shadow never felt malicious. Instead, it felt very calm and curious. We called it Lewis. I think Lewis was knocking on the bathtub and staying in the closet most of the time, which is why my low-key medium self was always iffy about that space. Who knows the real story, though? I have more, that's for sure, but that's the most that came from the cookie-cutter house since we left in August of 2021. I reside in a quaint UK town steeped in a history of battles and civil strife. At the age of 19, I embarked on a job as a waitress in a well-known restaurant nestled in the heart of the town. The restaurant was housed in a centuries-old building with a captivating legend that claimed King Charles II had sought refuge there and made a daring escape through its back door. The owner hinted that the establishment was haunted, but I, like others, casually dismissed such tales, thinking, aren't they all? The building, brimming with history, boasted an actual dungeon from bygone eras, complete with a faux skeleton, a feature I hesitated to explore. Yet it was an engaging conversation starter for patrons. My first summer working there coincided with a break from university. One sweltering day, I was upstairs restocking the minibar with an assortment of mixers and pristine glasses. Clumsily, I knocked over a bottle which triggered a curious sequence of events. I heard a cascade of sounds, like numerous bottles rolling beneath the bar, shattering one by one. Astonishingly, a wine glass materialized out of thin air and crashed into the crate holding the bottles. Anticipating a significant cleanup task, I peered under the bar, only to find nothing amiss. Oddly, the one sole bottle was on its side, the one which I had initially toppled, and it remained intact, perplexing me. On another occasion, while navigating the bustling kitchen with a stack of plates in my grip, my necklace inexplicably catapulted itself and landed at the far end of the kitchen. To my amazement, when I retrieved it, the clasp remained securely fastened. Pictures would seemingly float off the walls, much to the astonishment of both staff and patrons. Ladles would unexpectedly leap from simmering pots as the chefs prepared their culinary creations, and glasses would mysteriously glide across surfaces before our bewildered eyes. Some colleagues claimed to have seen the apparition of a Civil War soldier strolling through the upstairs bar, though I personally never bore witness to such a spectre. These inexplicable occurrences were regular features of my time at the restaurant, creating an atmosphere that was simultaneously eerie and captivating. When I returned to work during the Christmas season, however, the enigmatic phenomena had ceased. Strangely, throughout it all, I never felt fear. Perhaps it was not a malevolent presence, but one thing was certain. I had never encountered anything quite like it, before or since. My roommate and I recently moved into a new apartment. Almost immediately we began to experience a series of unsettling events. These strange occurrences included mysterious tapping on our closet and windows, the occasional sound of footsteps when no one was around, and an unshakable feeling of being under constant observation. Even our ceiling fan seemed to have a mind of its own, spinning faster and generating a louder hum for no apparent reason. Additionally, both of us caught fleeting glimpses of undefinable figures in the corner of our eyes. At first, we tried to rationalize these bizarre incidences as mere quirks of the new place, possibly just the house settling or producing normal everyday noises. However, our skepticism took a hit during a casual evening chat when the tapping returned. I decided to make a whimsical attempt at communication, suggesting a code where 1 tap meant yes and 2 meant no. When I inquired about the presence of someone or something with a series of questions, we received a single tap as a response. Following this eerie incident, our anxiety levels reached a new height, and we couldn't help but entertain the disconcerting idea that our apartment might indeed be haunted. To rule out wiring issues, we thoroughly inspected them, and we also have multiple fire detectors and a carbon monoxide detector as well. Now, one thing is that our apartment occupies the top floor with only an attic space above us. We explored the possibility of any abandoned upper-level apartments, but it remains an enigma. In addition to the previously mentioned events, other strange things happened on the first few days we were there, like the doorknob mysteriously jingling. I could try and explain that away as a potential break-in, but my room constantly feels colder than the rest of the apartment, and objects will occasionally move on their own. The unsettling events escalated after an ill-fated attempt to interact with whatever might be present. The closet housing the attic entrance would inexplicably open by itself. The back porch entrance would also swing open, even in my roommate's presence. The shower curtain would be drawn back on its own, and during a shower, I felt an eerie touch. My roommate had an unsettling experience too, with something he described as an ice-cold hand tracing a circle on his back. However, most disturbingly, our confrontation with the unknown took a more sinister turn when my roommate was with his friend in the house, when suddenly he felt as though he was being strangled by an invisible force. Candles would flicker in the rooms devoid of any draft, and a door that wasn't locked seemed to be held shut by an invisible presence. There was also the whispering that we would both hear that only added to the sense of unease in our apartment. And I ask this of you: do you think our house could be haunted? My family moved into a family home in a small village almost 6 years ago. It was my mom, her boyfriend, and my 2 younger siblings, and I started noticing strange activity around the time. It's not that I had ever experienced anything similar. When we lived in a flat in a city before, I had a painting on my bedroom wall that occasionally kept falling down and tilting by itself. But that is nothing compared to what happened at this abode. I noticed that something would gently tug on my hair from time to time, usually in the evening when I played games with a few online friends, or even when I was just sitting in my chair, no headphones, nothing there that my hair could possibly get stuck on. It freaked me out for a bit at the start, but I became used to it, and I barely even noticed it these days. This is the only thing that kept happening since we moved here, and one time when something was holding my little sister's balloon up by the ceiling. There was no helium in that balloon, and no way that it would stay up naturally. When I tried pulling the string, I felt a force pulling the balloon upwards, so I realized it could be a spirit, since I do believe in this stuff, and asked it if I could have the balloon. Then the balloon immediately started to descend. Both my mother and I were shocked, but didn't really fear the potential spirit would harm us, so we let it be. That was until 5 months ago, when my best friend moved to the house because of family problems. I also got 2 cats in the same month. So all 4 of us were living on the ground floor, while my mum, her boyfriend, and my siblings lived upstairs. Since my BFF got here, much creepier stuff started to occur. For example, when I was cleaning a cabinet in the kitchen, I left it wide open and started cleaning a drawer next to it, when suddenly, I see a pack of tissues that I had just put in the other cabinet fly out of it, and the cabinet door slammed closed. I had chills all over my back, as the energy around me felt hostile, but I stood my ground, opened the cabinet again, and put the tissues back in, while calmly but firmly saying, "It stays open. I need it to dry out." It didn't happen again since then. One day my friend was walking in our hallway with a basket of laundry and heard a loud bang on the door next to her. Then the door handle shook, and the door slightly opened. She said she almost crapped herself and got chills. We also kept hearing knocking, usually on windows, as well as steps over the wooden part of the floor in the hallway, even when no one else was home, and when you walk away from a specific room, which was usually the kitchen or a small storage room. You always feel like you're being watched. Our lights started flickering recently, but that could have just been the old electricity. I also recently caught a spirit playing with my cat's tail while she was asleep. Now I am aware that cats move their tails in weird ways when they are fast asleep, but these movements were too unnatural, and it almost looked like someone grabbed the tip of her tail by just 2 fingers and kept tugging it upward. But it happened right in front of me, and I didn't feel like this spirit was evil, and judging from how it was just tugging on the cat's tail without really bothering her, I think it might have been the one who kept tugging on my hair and also the one who played with my little sister's balloon before. I didn't feel like I was in danger or anything like that. So I think there are two different spirits now, one hostile, one good, that just want attention. We think the hostile one might be an entity/spirit from my BFF's last job. She used to work as a scare actor in a movie museum that was located inside old catacombs under the city. She would tell me about weird stuff that kept happening there every time she slept over in the museum. She travelled very far for her job, and she would sometimes sleep in the back rooms where the actors get ready, and would see stuff in the night vision security cameras like orbs following people around the catacombs, or hear knocking, steps in the hallway, and seeing objects move. Even hear aggressive bangings on the door of the room, with the door visibly shaking from it while she was sleeping there. I don't like the hostile spirit, and would like to get rid of it. But I kind of like the good one, who we decided to call Jacob. I know it probably wasn't the best decision to name it, but we felt bad just calling it Ghost, as we felt safe with Jacob around. At least, I do. Once you acknowledge him, he doesn't do anything for a few days. It's almost like he says hi in his own way. One night, we were both sitting in the kitchen with my BFF, talking by our small fireplace when out of nowhere, we both got super creeped out, chills and everything, and felt like there was something watching us. My friend, who was about to go to the bathroom a second before we felt this, looked at me and said, "I don't feel like going to the bathroom anymore." I just nodded and said that I felt that too. We tried not to look into the other room or the hallway, where it was dark, and the doors were both wide open. We were afraid that we would see something or someone, so we kept staring into the fire for a good 10 minutes, until suddenly the atmosphere visibly changed, and we felt as if someone had just put their hands on my shoulder, and all fear left my body. I don't know if it was Jacob, but I thanked him out loud, as I usually feel safe when he's around. Then I got up and walked my bestie to the bathroom, since she was still kind of freaking out. That was the most recent interaction we got with them, but I still want to get rid of the one that gives us the creeps. I read that white sage smudging is effective, so I got a white sage smudge stick from a local spiritual store, but I haven't used it yet, as I fear that if I do it wrong, I may get rid of Jacob. Anyone have any ideas of what to do? Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed tonight's collection of haunted house stories. I think we had some really good ones tonight. If you agree, please be sure to let me know. Thank you for everyone who voted in the poll in regards to keeping the intro and stuff. I appreciate that you guys like it. Alright then guys, if I would like to extend a huge thanks to my members and patrons whose names are on screen as well. Thank you all so much for your continued support. It means the world to me. And if you'd like some extra perks, you can check them out over there. Link in the description. If you want your stories read on the channel, email them over to me or post them on my Reddit page. More stories can be found on screen here and here. Until next time, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.